Good evening, everyone. It is May the 23rd, and we are here for a special meeting and work session of the City Council. We're going to enter the special meeting first, so I'm going to ask the City Clerk to read the notice of special meeting.
Okay. Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023 at 6 p.m., followed by the regularly scheduled work session in Council Chambers, 406 Ivinson Avenue, and via Zoom for the following purpose. 1, supplemental budget amendments, and 2, bid award Fire Department Engine 4 Class A pumping apparatus without trade-in.
Thank you, City Clerk. And as is normal, we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance before we begin. And I think just by way of a note, spend a little extra time thinking as Memorial Day approaches as we say the pledge today in memory of those who we have lost in service to the country. So if you would all join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. We will move into public comments on non-agenda items. Any member of the public wishing to speak to the council has 3 minutes. You can come forward if you're in the room or raise your hand if you're on Zoom, and we will let you into our Zoom room. Okay, seeing no public comment, we're going to close that public comment period, move on to item 1B, Councilor Pierce.
And Mayor, just a point of reference, do we need to do roll call?
That seems like a wise idea. Thank you, Councilor. City Clerk, go ahead.
Just thought about that.
If it's not on the agenda, apparently I don't know what we're doing.
Okay. Gabriel?
Here.
Newman?
Here.
O'Doherty?
Here.
Pierce?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Shumway?
Here.
Somerville?
Here.
Cumby?
Here.
And Harrington.
Here.
That is 9 present, 0 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. I appreciate that. All right, we will move to item 1B. Councilor Pierce.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to award the bid for a Class A fire pumping apparatus, engine number 4, without trade-in in the amount of a base bid of $999,014 with a project contingency of $175,000, rejecting all options totaling $120,301 to Rosenbauer, IKON, Icon Fire Dealer, and authorize the fire chief to sign.
Second.
Motion by Pierce, second by Richardson. Chief Johnson, welcome.
Honorable Mayor, members of council, good evening. Just so I just read how I wrote that in the rejecting all options portion is the 120,000 was the options. That's not the total. So when it read out, I was like, I could have wrote that better. So anyway, we're on the schedule through the fleet program to replace one of our pumping apparatus and rotate one into reserve status. I brought some people with me tonight for a couple of reasons. One is that there's an incredible amount of work that goes into preparing a package. It's a team effort. We get assistance from the street department, John Wagner's people helping us out looking over specs. We develop specs. A lot of organizations will contract this kind of work out. They'll farm it out and pay someone to do this for them. We've always done our own build from inside. So the second reason I brought them is if you have any technical questions, I can drag one of them up to answer. So I would like to recognize some people that worked hard on this project. And the heavy lifters were Dan Young, equipment operator, raise your hand. Mike Nyquist, equipment operator, raise your hand. When Chase Bridgman was on injury leave, he helped out with the specs quite a bit, company officer. The project runs through the operations division. That's, I met him the other night. Shift Commander Kevin Lamb, and then I review materials at the end. And so they developed a spec package they sent out. The operations chief contacted 6 different manufacturers. The spec package was over 50 pages. We only received 2 bids. So when we receive those bids, we have to take time to go through line by line all the questions we have. They contact the dealer, they contact the manufacturer, they get their questions answered, and then we try to make a value judgment on what's best for our community. Where we landed was the low bid. Both bids came in under the project budget that was developed. The project budget was set at $1.265 million, and Rosenbauer bid came in at $999,014. So we'd like to bring that up for the one we recommend for award. The Pierce bid was higher. It was a good bid. It would serve us well, but it was higher, and it was also 1,188 days billed. The Rosenbauer 750 days billed. So we felt it better. There's quite a bit of difference in time, and the Rosenbauer does meet the specs. The options, we want to decline all options on the bid for a couple reasons. One is we can go out on the market and buy those options cheaper in some cases. In other cases, it opens us up to, we decline the options, and we have probably 2 cycles of AFG grants we can apply for and try to supplement that cost of those options in that grant process. And it wouldn't be supplanting. It's just, I list it as a contingency, and that way we have the project budget if we need to look at that. So there are options such as we need to rotate out some nozzles. We need to replace some hose in the department, so we'd like to build it into this project. So that being said, what's before you tonight is consideration to award the bid to Rosenbauer Icon Fire Dealership, Rosenbauer manufacturer, for $999,014, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Pierce, and then Councilor Shumway.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Is this one of the first times we've gotten a fire truck from Icon? Am I saying that right? Is it Icon?
We have a Rosenbauer. We was through a different dealer. This will be the first one through Icon Fire. So.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway.
Chief, thank you for you and your staff on working so hard to get this ready. You indicated that what you call the build is going to be 150 days. I understood it was over 2 years.
It's 750.
Yeah, 750, which is a little over 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. In the meantime, we'll use the one that we're going to retire and have as a backup, correct?
Honorable Mayor, Councilor Shumway, that's a real good question. The one that we have that is being rotated out, that manufacturer's out of business. It's still running. The guys work on it hard to keep it going, but it's a reserve status. If something happens to it, we can't, the typical service centers that we use won't work on it. So we're doing the work on it through the street department and ourselves. It's running right now. If we want to keep it running, and there was no trade-in option offered to us from either bid. When this is to become final, we'll have to have a plan for that exiting our department. I don't believe it'd be good to try to maintain something that's not supported by any service center. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor.
One more. How many hours do we have on the engine on this?
That's why I brought these guys.
Okay.
We have 8 on engine 4, right around 17,000.
17,000.
Wow. Council members, any other questions? Okay, we will go to the public on this item. Any members of the public who wish to speak to this item can come forward in the room or raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period, and back to you, council, for any comments before the vote. Yeah, Councilor Gabriel, please.
Thanks. I just thought of something, Chief, I was wondering about, could you explain for the public how the financing of a fire truck happens through your department? I mean, it must take, years of planning and looking ahead, okay, this is what we need to do here and so on, to be able to pay for a unit that's as costly as this?
Honorable Mayor, Councilor Gabriel. So several years ago, the fleet planning was centralized and run through the street division. So the street division basically assesses, and Brooks can probably talk to this a lot more depth than I can, but they assess the needs of all division, all vehicles in the city, and prioritizes based on, they have all the maintenance records, they know the rotation and whatnot, and then we this unit was actually recommended, probably 3 years ago, and we were able to recommend a fleet. We can put it off a year, At that time, we didn't realize, the supply chain issues, and we were going to be looking at a 2 to 3 year build on something. So we're in good shape right now, but we need to move forward with this one. But that's the planning phase, and then the monies are set aside through the general fund, and then they're managed through the street division fleet program. So. And one thing to follow up on is I remember City Manager Jordan talking the other night, a couple of weeks ago, about there's some big numbers that are being carried forward. You're going to see this project rebudgeted for probably 2-3 times. So this project will be one of those that's carried over, and that money will have to keep getting carried over because we won't have it done yet. So.
Thank you, Councilor. And Chief, that was a good note for us as we watch this come back again some other time. Councilor Newman.
I just have a question. I was looking at the options. Could you explain, just so I understand, why we go from like a push-pull rod to a pistol grip handle on these discharges?
Honorable Mayor, please. Councilor Newman, I will call up my spec team.
This is my first time standing in front of you, so Honorable Mayor,
welcome.
Councilman Newman. Your question was, why were we going from push-pull to pistol grip?
Right.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we actually rejected that. We won't be doing that because that was an expensive option for something. The idea behind it is the push-pull rods basically stick out this far from the engine when you're using them, and a lot of times they can get it in the way of other things, including hose lines coming from the engine. We've had issues in the past where when a hose line is charged and there are crews inside of a building on fire, that hose then can be accidentally shut off a line that we don't want to be shut off, obviously. So a pistol grip is a little bit shorter of a throw, if that makes sense. And we considered looking at that. It was we had an engine drive through town with a dealer that had it with them, and so he offered it to us. He said, hey, this is something we can do. So anyway, we put that in the bid just to see what the price was. We thought that was a little too high of a price for something that's that simple. But that's the theory behind it. Does that make sense or clarify anything?
Sure, please.
So but we're not going to look at like a third party to do this in the, like, after we get the truck?
No, okay. not for that particular item. Absolutely, no.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. Council members, any final comments or questions? Okay. City Clerk, you can call the roll call.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses, 0 no, and 0 absent.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has been approved. Thank you, Chief, and thank you to your team for joining us this evening. We will move on to item 1C. I'm going to go ahead and just read that in by title. I'm just going to bring on supplemental budget amendments onto the floor, and then we will move into If you all looked at your email, you will see that at this point, I'm looking for a counselor to move the city manager's recommended items. Do I have a council member? I could have probably sorted that out ahead of time, but there you go. Yeah, Councilor Richardson.
I will move to approve the city manager's recommendations for changes to the fiscal year 2024 budget, increasing the fiscal year 2024 recommended budget by $711,492.
Second.
Motion by Richardson, second by Vice Mayor Cumby. City Manager, would you like, or Director Wade, like to take this one?
Mayor, I'd be happy to. I believe that Director Wade will make the presentation. I just wanted to thank the council for your time in the work sessions this month to review the supplemental budget recommendation, and appreciate your attention to detail and the budget amendments that you brought forward. Director Wade received those yesterday. We at the management team level discussed them and reviewed them, provide some additional feedback, and I believe Jennifer will go over the amendments as well as cover with you what administrative or sort of housekeeping modifications were made to the budget to bring it current to date. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Director Wade.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council. The first item on our agenda this evening is a motion to adjust the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024 for management changes. And so, as you know, we're preparing our budget estimates for the recommended publication in January and February. And there's a lot of time that elapses between the time those estimates are developed and the time that the council adopts the budget in June. This year, we have several changes to propose for your consideration. All of them are related to changes in forecast. Most of them are related to items that you have already approved through council action. And so if you think about our budget amendment presentations, we had one just, I believe, last week or the week before last, items that have gone out for bid and are awarded, contracts on capital construction projects. Most of the changes that we're recommending this evening are due to those matters. $484,492 to be precise. As you would expect, most of the change you've already approved is in our enterprise funds, water, wastewater, and solid waste, because that's where most of our capital construction is happening right now in terms of those bid awards that happened during the winter months. For the presentation this evening, I'm going to focus on items you have not already seen, which total $227,000. Of this new appropriation, $55,000 would be funded with cash reserves, and $172,000 would be funded with grant revenue. And so most of the amount that we're recommending to you is actually offset by grant revenue. And I'll go into each item to provide you with more detail. The city manager has actually recommended two of the management changes this evening. The first is a $200,000 increase to the general fund for a study to support planning for public transportation. The council may remember that you approved a grant application for this initiative just a few weeks ago on April the 4th. The project is an 80% grant, 20% match. Additionally, we are recommending a $12,000 increase in the Parks and Rec Development Fund to adjust for actual awards by the Albany County Recreation Board. And so we're going to increase the allocation to Big Brothers and Big Sisters and the Laramie Soccer Club based on the recommendations of that board. And then finally, the city manager is recommending $15,000 in the water fund, specifically in ranch operations, so that staff can perform survey work and so that we can equip the new ranch manager position with additional supplies for that position. And at this time, I would answer any questions you have, or other staff can answer those questions if it's more appropriate.
Thank you, Director Wade. Council members, any questions? Okay. Yeah, Councilor Shumway.
Just a question about providing supplies to the ranch manager. I understood that the ranch manager was responsible for his own supplies and operation.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Councilor Shumway. This is a recent change in our approach to managing and overseeing our agricultural properties. So a little bit of history. This time last year, we were closing on the Bath Hart Ranch. In adding that acreage to our portfolio, we determined that we need a full-time position in the city government structure. And so we have converted a position to ranch supervisor. That person being responsible to oversee both of the city's ranch properties, to oversee and be responsible for irrigation, and work with our lessee at the Monolith Ranch, but also to oversee the services agreements that we will likely be involved in for a number of years on the Bath Hart Ranch, to have custom hay crews come in, et cetera, and help us to put up the hay each year. So the ranch supervisor position is maybe not what you're thinking of. It's not the lessee at the Monolith. It's a city position. We hired that position this year and then really quickly realized we hadn't put budget in for simple things, like literally I was out at the office of this person yesterday and they were telling me they were bringing some supplies from home to clean the bathroom. So we need to do better and we need to give them cleaning supplies. There's also some tools and some kind of shop supplies, light duty things that they'll need, particularly on the Bath Hart Ranch, where we don't have the lease operation in place with another entity who may have tools like that.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions, council members? Okay, we will move to members of the public. Any member of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom or come forward. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and move on to comments by the council. Please, Councilor
I just
Bodie.
want to thank our staff for pursuing all these grants. It's really great news. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other councilors? Okay, City Clerk, call the roll, please. Councilor Pierce, did you have?
So maybe I'm a little confused, and it has to do with procedure, nothing to do with budget. You introduced the item, but as far as I can tell, we don't actually have a motion. Or do
Councilor
we?
Pierce, we do. Councilor
Okay.
Richardson introduced it and Vice Mayor seconded it just slightly after I
Okay,
brought
okay.
these amendments.
I totally fell asleep
And-
for that.
No, you're fine. And this is I think it's a good question to ask, because we have, what I read on was supplemental budget amendments as a sort of an umbrella. There will
Okay.
be a motion on each amendment moving forward.
coming-
So the first is sort of a package from staff.
Okay,
Moving forward from here, we'll have a single motion on every council member's budget amendment.
thank you.
Clear enough? We're all going to figure this out together.
Learning experience.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. City Clerk, you can call the roll.
Somerville,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes?
Pierce,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
and Harrington.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses, 0 no.
Thank you, City Clerk. Those amendments have been adopted. Council, we will move into the budget amendments that council members have brought, and I would ask that each council member who brought an amendment be the person to make that motion. We'll work through them in order that you find them in your packet. So, Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. I move to include a consulting fee of $40,000 in the fiscal year 2024 general fund budget to be used to support Laramie Public Art Coalition for administrative expenses and professional consulting fees incurred on projects involving the city, and that funds not expended in the current fiscal year will be carried over to the following fiscal year.
Second?
Motion by Richardson, second by Gabriel. At this point, council members, the motion is pretty self-explanatory, but maybe what we'll do is if there's any questions by council members, or if a council member would like to spend some time introducing their motion, I'll offer that to you, Councilor Richardson, if you want to walk through it. Otherwise, council members can just ask questions.
I'm happy to share a little bit. Over the last few years, Laramie Public Art has done a lot of work with the city, and they have been paid for the projects. So the artists' fees, those sorts of things are happening, but the administrative expenses that they are incurring are not necessarily being covered. So Laura sent us a spreadsheet of the amount of hours she estimates that she has worked with the city on projects, and the amount administratively that was paid, I believe, was $7,000 for over 8 weeks of time that she put into things. And so she and Assistant Manager Feeser had been in conversations, and the idea then moving forward is that the two will work on a case-by-case basis as to how much an administrative fee is reasonable for each project, so that the administrative side is being covered for these projects that are very heavily city-focused. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, Council? Yeah, Councillor Shumway.
Thank you, Your Honor. My understanding is that Laura is a full-time benefited employee, and I don't know what our budget was prior to this on having administrative supplements. I don't know why we're adding to her income or salary since she's already full-time benefited.
Councillor Shumway, that's a great question, and if you don't mind, Councillor Richardson, I'll take that one. I think the important distinction is this is not money going to Laura. This is not a salary. This is not an increase in her salary. This is funding for the organization, LPAC, for the work they do for the city beyond administrative fees. So LPAC is a participant in, say, our 3rd Street Gateway projects. They are doing that work without any compensation. So they, as an organization, and it is oftentimes Laura, but there's another staff member, they're doing that work fully uncompensated. And we're all familiar with sitting in that room and not being paid, but I personally believe that it is not fair to ask an organization to participate in a conversation like that benefits all of us uncompensated. I don't know if that makes it more clear, but we're not talking about Laura making more money. We're talking about funding LPAC for work that's being done.
Thank you for that explanation. In the past, we had not had a line item budget for this. Is that correct? So this is a new allocation for this?
That's right.
And did this come from the committee, or did this come from the city's suggestion?
Councillor, this came from Councillor Richardson and I working with LPAC, as I was the former liaison before my time as mayor, and now Councillor Richardson is the liaison. So this was a conversation that sort of came out of identifying that gap in work being done unfunded. But it is a new item. Councillor Newman. Councillor Newman.
Can somebody explain to me why we're going to carry over funds that we haven't used if we could use them for something else from fiscal year to fiscal year? Because if we start to get, 20,000, and then if we vote on this again, then we got 80,000 next time, we don't use it, and it just keeps building. Can somebody explain to me why we're going to do that instead of use it for something else?
My understanding, and Assistant City Manager, correct me if I'm wrong, we're creating a sort of a not to exceed fund. It'll be at 40,000. We would just carry that money into the next year's budget, totaling 40,000 again next year.
That needs to be reworded.
Assistant City Manager, if you want to take a crack at that.
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, through you. Actually, as we've discussed this and worked through it, I think the intent is not to have the money carry over and build. It's just to make a continuing $40,000 payment. We don't know how much we're going to actually use LPAC in certain years. So this next couple of years would actually be very intensive. Mayor Harrington's also already brought up the 3rd Street project, but I've already used up, 6, 8, 10 hours of LPAC's time just in lining up and getting ready for the 3rd Street project, and we haven't even got to the requirement to allocate for art. Now, I'm not so sure we're going to have projects like that 3 years down the road, but the intent is not to have it build, as is indicated, but to have it be an ongoing fulfilled request.
Please, go ahead.
So should the amendment be reworded somehow? Because it does say carried over to the following fiscal year. So if we're going to vote on this motion, then that's not the case, right?
Yep, I think you're right. I would agree.
Great. So I would just ask then for an amendment to the amendment. If any council member would like to take a crack at that.
Should we ask Director Wade how she would word that properly? Because it looks like she has.
Councilmember O'Doherty, that sounds like an exceptional idea. Director Wade, not to make you
Honorable Mayor,
wordsmith on
City
the,
Council. What I would recommend is that we strike everything after the word city, meaning and that funds not expended, so strike the last part. And I move to include an ongoing consulting fee of $40,000, and that actually would be consistent with how we disclosed ongoing increases to the public in our budget publication, and I feel would meet the needs of the motion if that is the council's desire.
thank you, Director Wade. Is there a council member interested in making that amendment? Councilor Richards, please, you absolutely can, yes.
Assuming that's me, but thank you. I never remember. Thank goodness you're here. Okay, so I move to amend that motion to say, I move to include a consulting fee of $40,000 in the fiscal year 2024 general fund budget to be used to support Laramie Public Art Coalition for administrative expenses and professional consulting fees incurred on projects involving the city, and an ongoing consulting fee of $40,000. Is that right?
Councilor Richardson, I think maybe the place for ongoing would be in that first line, if it's all the same to you.
Okay.
To include it.
An ongoing consulting fee of $40,000 in fiscal year 2024 general fund budget to be used to support Laramie Public Art Coalition for administrative expenses and professional consulting fees incurred on projects involving the city, period. Thanks.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Gabriel. So motion by Richardson, second by Gabriel. We are council members on the amendment itself. Councilor Shumway.
Since this language came from the Director of Jen, I'm sure this is going to work, but I want to make sure. If we have no consulting expenses for a year, the consulting fee for that year would be zero, correct?
That is my understanding,
And the
Councilor.
most we can go up to is 40,000 without changing the limit on this. So
Yeah.
the 40,000 would just be refilled to that amount each year, and some years it could be zero or any number in between that and 40,000.
Correct.
Okay.
Council members, any other questions here? Okay, we will go to the public on this item. City Manager and Director Wade, would you guys like a moment to discuss this? They're in the middle. I'm going to just give them a moment, Council.
And so I believe it is what council. Would you like to speak to that?
No, go ahead. If you're okay with it, then I.
Please, Director Wade.
Mayor, if I can speak to, so the motion as amended would appropriate $40,000 per year to be used on a billed as incurred basis. And so if there are no services, there would be no payments, and the funds would not be rebudgeted between years. And so 40,000 appropriated, used as incurred, and that money falls off each year.
Thank you, Director Wade. Is everybody clear on this one?
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. We will go to the public on this item. Any member of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom, or come forward if you're in the room. Okay. Seeing no public comment, we will close the public comment period. Back to you, council members, for any conversation before the vote.
Point of information,
Please.
so when we vote on, we're voting on an amendment to your amendment first?
Correct.
And then we will vote, okay.
That is
So
correct.
It's the same thing, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, council member. Okay. City Clerk, you can call the roll on the amendment to the amendment.
Newman,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Somerville, Somerville,
Yes.
okay. Richardson,
Yes?
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses and 0 no.
Thank you, City Clerk. That amendment has been approved. Council members, we're back on the main motion. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Okay. Yeah, Vice Mayor, please.
I don't quite understand the additional 40,000. And is the director's full-time salary, does the job description not include consultation with the city? So is the job description to work with the artists, to do these other things, and it doesn't include city consultation? So what we are asking is over and above that job description?
Councilor Richardson?
Correct. So at this point, the discussion, and I will be kind of frank here, among some of her board members is, wow, you're doing a lot of work for the city, but we aren't getting any sort of, the Public Art Coalition is not necessarily getting anything in return for the amount of work that you're doing, is where my sense, and Brian, correct me if you think I'm wrong, where we're kind of sitting, feeling like this, we need to protect your time and your resources if you're not getting compensated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council members, any other questions? Okay, we will move to the public on this item. Any members of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. Council members, last chance for a comment. Okay, City Clerk, you can call the roll.
Gabriel,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes?
Somerville,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
and Harrington.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses and 0 no, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has passed. We will move to the second motion. Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. I move to include a contract fee of no more than $100,000 in the fiscal year 2024 general fund budget, funded entirely by a transfer within the general government division for professional grant writing services, which can include but are not limited to researching, planning, developing, and writing grants in coordination with the City of Laramie.
Second.
Motion by Richardson, second by O'Doherty. Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. So brought this one forward because I know that the city already has a grant writer that they are utilizing, but I think there have been a number of times where the city, it seems as though the capacity to apply for some larger grants was not there. And in speaking with city manager, there are some larger grants perhaps moving forward that something like this could be utilized for. So this would be an additional $100,000 on top of the contract fee that we have in place with Sarah currently.
Council members, any questions on this item? Councilor Shumway.
Well, the contract employee has done an outstanding job, and you know, I have no problem with continuing to use the services that she provides. However, I don't know where $100,000 is going to go, because normally these grants do not have a requirement for the application. I don't know where the $100,000 is going. We still would need to go out to a contract grant writer to do this work. Are we talking about working at someone in addition to the contract grant writer that we have? So just go out to somebody that would have fees and to provide information. Okay, that's understandable, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions, Councilor Newman?
Is there any way that we could limit, so out of the 100,000, could we limit only like 50,000 could be for research and planning? Because I'm just thinking outside the box, what's stopping somebody from doing a whole bunch of research, taking $100,000 from us and we don't get anything in return?
I don't know if City Manager or Councilor Richardson would like to take that question, but.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor, it's yours.
I mean, I think a city manager would have more experience than I would in this area, but my assumption, and you know what they say about assumptions, but my assumption is that including all of these things that it can be utilized for, researching, planning, development, writing, et cetera, that would be laid out in whatever sort of contract that the city had in place with this contract person to explain the parameters of the work that they'd be doing. And so if they didn't need planning, but they needed the writing, you know, whatever that looked like on the city's end to fulfill their needs.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I have a comment.
Yeah, go for it. Sure. Vice Mayor.
Sometimes someone dedicated to research and planning can find things, so many things come out, and that it's oftentimes hard to follow. And by having someone who can come in and just spend that time doing research, identifying appropriate grants, and then moving it into that process of writing can be extremely helpful. So, that's all.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council members, any questions? Yeah, Councilor Doherty, comments are fine too.
I just thought we should clarify that Councilor Shumway, when he was asking his question, Councilor Richardson was nodding, and that might not be obvious for the public record, so.
Thank you, Councilor.
That was an answer, yes. And then I want to point out that there is a lot of money out there right now, and when I look at how many things are out there, it's overwhelming that I'm like, oh man, how can we possibly, track all of this and bring in the funds that we desperately need and could desperately use. And so I think this is a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Doherty. Vice Mayor.
And I just wanted to say that once you start that process of writing the grant and pulling it together, that's very myopic. So it's hard to keep your vision open for everything coming out. And sometimes these calls come out with very short timelines. So I think it could be very beneficial to have somebody scouting on a regular basis.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other questions, comments? City Manager.
Mayor, if I could just fill in a little bit for
Please.
council with some information that I've been able to run down in the last 12 hours since this budget amendment came in. I'd like to clarify, the person that we have on contract is responsible for researching. So there's a small set amount each month to conduct continuous ongoing monitoring and research. And we built a vast database of grants, new grants that we see through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and other legislation in the last few years, tracking whether we are eligible or not. In some cases, we think we're eligible, but the lift to prepare that application goes far beyond writing an application. And we'd give you an example just from this week. We have prepared a grant for transportation money through the Federal Department of Transportation. We did not make the cut, but they often give feedback on what you could do better or differently next time, and they will have another round coming up here in a few months that we could apply. One of the things that they expected to see in their application was not just a written plan of public outreach, but a lot of these grants are coming down now wanting that public outreach to have occurred for months ahead of time, public meetings and charrettes and all of these sorts of things. So that is far outside, really, of, I think, the skill set and the desire of our consultant, but there are other consultants that we can engage in partnership with her research and grant writing expertise to maybe do some of that other, whether it's public relations work, or in some cases, it's very technical, like benefit cost analysis that we could contract with separate firms for. So that's something that Ms. Reese and I had discussed today, and we can see some potential to use these funds, particularly as the competition and the requirements in order to be competitive seem to be really increasing. With so much money on the table, everybody's getting pretty crafty about how to get there. And the federal government does seem to be expecting more in an application.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Doherty?
If the county were just a little shy of needing another grant writer, and could these funds be used to help contract on some grants with the county, perhaps? Or would that wouldn't be in the scope of this?
Through you, Mayor, Councilor Doherty, I think that's certainly possible. Like, for instance, if the city and county were applying jointly for a grant, we could pool resources maybe for contracting technical assistance or public outreach or something. I don't know of anything right now that would meet that requirement, but it's not outlandish to think it could happen.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions, Council? Yeah, Councilor Shumway.
I want to ask the city manager, who would be the supervisor of the $100,000? Would that be Sarah Reese, or would that be the city manager? Would that be the assistant city manager? Who would be responsible to make sure that these funds are accounted for and properly distributed to the person doing the work?
Mayor, to you, Councilor, the funding will go into our general accounts budget, which is under the city manager's office. Right now, I directly supervise the contract with our grant consultant and researcher, and then so does the assistant city manager. When we write a separate contract with her to prepare a specific application, for instance, the assistant city manager may oversee that if it's within his sphere of responsibility. Other staff may oversee that grant writing contract if it's under their sphere of responsibility. But the management for these funds falls in a cost center that is under city management direction, city manager's office.
Thank you, Councilor Shumway. That was going to be my question as well. Any other questions, council members? Okay, we will go to the public on this item. Any members of the public wish to speak to this amendment? Go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Come forward in the room. Seeing none, we'll come back to the council. Councilor Pierce, excuse me.
So my question is related to coming from the Economic Development Reserve. And if I recall correctly, that Economic Development Reserve is roughly at 100,000. I mean, we don't have much left there, right? Am I right? Or is there?
Director Wade?
Honorable Mayor, through you, we actually last year adopted a reserve for economic development initiatives in the general fund for each year of the biennium. That reserve, some of that reserve was actually designated too for potential increases in our fee-for-service agreements, which we were expecting some. And so we have about $250,000 left that we did not strip this year because we want to maintain some on hand for economic development. But we really felt like in conversations with the city manager that the 250 wasn't going to be necessary, and that would be a great source of funding for this amendment so that we could avoid increasing appropriations in total.
Perfect, makes sense, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce, good question. Any other questions, council members? Okay, before the vote, I would just say that, nearly every agenda that's before us has at least one grant application, and I think when you think about those downstream costs to our staff in time to apply for those grants, this dollar amount starts to seem pretty small, in my opinion. And I will certainly be voting for this, but I just wanted to acknowledge that before we move to the vote. And City Clerk, you can call the roll, please.
Shumway?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Pierce?
Yes.
Gabriel?
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
and Harrington.
Yes.
There's 9 yeses and 0 no.
Thank you. That amendment has been adopted. We will move on to motion 3, and I'm going to recognize the vice mayor for this item.
As Councilor Sullivan.
Sure. Councilor Somerville, the vice mayor has deferred to you for this item if you would like.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
I move that the City of Laramie approve a budget amendment in the general fund for a mental health response program to include telebehavioral health in an amount not to exceed $100,000 starting in fiscal year 2024.
Second.
Motion by Somerville, second by Richardson. Councilor Somerville, would you like to give us an overview here?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So I think the council has been discussing this idea for a couple of years now, and it feels like we're in a good spot to go ahead and work on implementing something. I won't speak for the chief, but I know there's been some conversations going on with some local providers in the county and UW on what that might look like. And it seems like there might be a good plan in place to move forward with some case management and some telebehavioral health access in the field that would aid our law enforcement in dealing with mental health calls for service. This $100,000 right now, just to note for the council, I do believe that this is a placeholder. There are some other funding sources that may come available here shortly in the future. And certainly that would be ideal if we could not spend city general fund for this money. But I think it's an important enough program that we need to have this money in the budget just in case, so that we can go ahead and get this moving forward. I would also just add, I know $100,000 seems like a lot of money, but the return on investment for being able to, have a better response to these calls, helping community members better, their families better, that pays dividends in the community. So I certainly view it as an investment. And Mayor, I'd be happy to stand for any questions or invite the city manager or the chief to weigh in.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Councilors, any questions on this item? Councilor Shumway, and then we'll go to you, Vice Mayor.
My question, when we talk about telehealth, there was a discussion prior to this amendment indicating that there would be a fee of about $1,000 to set it up for telehealth, and then up to $300 per phone call to a telehealth provider. Doing the math, and I could be way off on this, but doing the math, I did this. If there is, we would be one of many people that would use telehealth, but let's suppose that there is one company that provides this service, and they have an individual that is on receiving these phone calls 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks out of the year. If that one person was receiving the $300 per phone call, he'd make about $600,000 a year. If he received 2 phone calls every hour, he'd make $1.2 million a year. I think that's excessive. And the reason I say that, and I said this before, is there's many of these services, like through VOA and through others, where the cost is very small. The suicide hotline is free. And when we start giving our policemen iPads to go around, and every time they have someone that they feel like is in crisis, or maybe there's a family issue or something, and they make that phone call, it's $300. That adds up very quickly, and I think it enriches the person providing the service far and above what would be reasonable and prudent. So that's, and again, I'm not sure that I've got all of the information and all this, but it just seems excessive at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember Shumway. Chief Brown, welcome. I don't know if you want to take a crack at that or not, but you're standing there, so you're going to get a shot.
Sure, I can try. Honorable Mayor, council members. So that was one of the quotes that I received, was approximately $1,000 buy-in and then $300 to $350 per call. I did have a meeting with, I'm going to read this because it's rather lengthy, the Executive Vice President and Chief Business Officer of the Volunteers of America, Northern Rockies, Heath Steele, also with the Senior Director of Clinical Services, Kristen Cavello. And we are working on a pilot program through the VOA. That counseling contract was one of the options that we were looking at, but I'd much rather have a stakeholder in our community, specifically to Albany and Laramie counties, but the larger Wyoming community, which the VOA is. And they are interested in partnering with us for a pilot program. So that will offset that cost. They are potentially, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but offering 24/7 clinician service available to us, which we currently have through our gatekeeping program. This would just be on a larger scale. So it would still be a very similar telehealth behavioral response. We're looking at a three-prong approach. One portion of that would be the telebehavioral health, where we would give our dispatchers, hopefully eventually our EMS responders, and then also our police officers the ability to contact a mental health provider in the field. And our dispatchers will be able to direct callers who meet the criteria to do the same. So that would be the first one, would be the telehealth response, the ability for officers to contact a mental health professional through an iPad, an app, whatever they need in the field. The second portion of that would be training for our dispatchers, looking at what other agencies doing to divert some of those calls immediately to a mental health provider that are fit to do so. An example would be, if one of the first questions they ask is, do you have a plan to harm yourself? The second question, do you have a weapon that you would use to harm yourself? And the third question would be, do you intend to harm anybody else? If the answer is no to all those, then we would direct them specifically to the VOA. At least that's what we're shooting for. That would be the second prong, is training our dispatchers appropriately, looking at other models and mirroring what other agencies are doing that's successful, and communities. The third prong would be the VOA actually agreed to partner with us, the university police, and the sheriff's department to hire a caseworker. That cost potentially would be split 4 ways, and we're looking for some grant funding for that. And what we would do is we would embed that caseworker in the Laramie Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, and the university. They would spend a day or two each week at each one of the agencies, and we'd be able to refer them all of our calls for service that require a mental health response, so they can provide the appropriate wraparound services. So hopefully we can offset some of those second, third, fourth, fifth, 6 calls for service that we get from the same individuals. So it's a multi-pronged approach. Right now, I respectfully request $50,000, and I appreciate the offer for the $100,000. To be honest with you, we're so early in this pilot program, I'm not sure I can spend that much in the first year, but I'm a proactive chief, I can take a swing. But I think $50,000 is appropriate at this time for this project, and should we need more, I'm comfortable coming to the council, who has been extremely supportive with a supplemental budget request. But I think the $50,000 request gets us in the door with a telebehavioral health side, retraining our dispatchers, coming up with a program, mirroring what other agencies are doing and what's working in other communities, and then VOA estimated maybe an October timeframe for the caseworker to be embedded in the police departments, and that's going to require some additional hiring and training on behalf of that person. So I hope that answers the question, but I'm willing to take more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. That was helpful. Councilor Shumway, you feel okay there? Okay. I'm going to go to the Vice Mayor, and then Councilor Doherty, Councilor Newman.
And actually, I was just going to ask, the chief has already answered my question, and I was going to address that the chief was estimating a requirement of $50,000 at this time, and also staff has recommended $50,000 at that time for this initial project, and then as other things develop, it's so early in that process, as they develop, then we could look at that again and propose an amendment at the time that it would be appropriate if we could not find grant funding that would actually pay to extend those partnerships. So that was my question. So
Yeah.
I guess it needs to,
Thank you,
the
Vice
next
Mayor.
thing would be amending them.
We will get through these questions, and then we can move to that if
Okay.
a council member would like. Councilor O'Doherty.
This may be more of a comment. You want me to wait?
You're fine.
So 2 weeks ago, we heard from Chief Johnson that 50% of the time that they get a call, they get another call. A lot of our calls are for EMTs, not so much for fires, if I understood that right. We're spending a lot of time driving, our staff is spending a lot of time driving people to other hospitals. I understand that people in mental health crises have been turned away many times at least I heard last summer about people being turned away from the hospital because they didn't have room. And then we're housing them in the jail, which doesn't seem like that's worth $300. I mean, if we can keep people so that they don't need to go to the hospital, don't need to be transported to Cheyenne, and don't need to go to jail, it seems like it certainly is worth a pilot program for this amount. So I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Newman.
Chief, could you tell me how the technology is in your department right now? Would you need new iPads? Would you need, updated phones for this system if we were to approve it? And if so, would you be okay if we approved the 100,000 but made 50 of it available to that new technology?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Councilmember Newman. So I actually did receive some quotes, and we're actually looking at purchasing approximately 10 iPads, and with the subscription and the cost of the iPads through a 3-year contract, they're approximately $350 an iPad, which actually is significantly cheaper than the phones that we purchase. So what I'm looking at doing is using the 10, having enough available for patrol to check out, which would be approximately 6 to 7 iPads per shift, having 3 extra iPads with subscription services, which also could act as a cell phone if they needed it. They could use it for Zoom meetings if they need it, or whatever venue the VOA will choose to use to connect with us for the telehealth portion of it. So for the most part, we have everything in place minus that component, so it'll be a relatively inexpensive component. We're looking at approximately $12,000 to $15,000 the first year, including subscription costs for that, and that'll also give us the opportunity to use those tablets for other things. Currently, we issue each one of our patrol officers digital cameras when they're hired with the police department. However, the problem that we're running into is 2 or 3 years down the road, most of those digital cameras are obsolete, and what we're finding is that our cell phone cameras are actually significantly better than our digital cameras. With a contracted iPad, we'd be able to renew those contracts every 3 years at a minuscule cost or minimal cost, and we would be able to get updated cameras, which we can also use for Axon Capture, which is a function from evidence.com, and that gives us the ability to use those as cameras uploaded directly into our evidence.com evidence system and have instant access to those and not have to download it from a camera. So there's other benefits to the tablet. So I kind of am taking a little bit advantage of the situation to better our agency, but I also believe that the telebehavioral health program will have significant impact on the community.
Thank you, Chief. It sounds like you are finding efficiencies, not taking advantage.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vice Mayor.
Chief, I'm wondering, with the iPads, would they be utilizing like a hotspot and a VPN system, network system for, to maintain privacy and...
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so they would be on the same city provider that we use for our cell phone services, so they still would be accessing it, utilizing all of our security features utilized on our cell phones and other security features used for our computers, such as our laptops.
And that's included in your estimate, the cost of that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council members, any other questions? If not, yeah, Councilor Shumway, and then back to you, Councilor Newman.
All right. The iPad, I'm sure that there will be training on what the order we have of who we contact first, second, third, and fourth. Now, my understanding is there's some of this, like the emergency line for suicide prevention, things like that. That's an easy one. But when you also listed here, emergency medical services responders, also VOA, and then you have a couple of cities where we can do the telehealth. Now, VOA, I believe their main support team is in Colorado, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the person that we have the most contact with is the executive director through our area, and she's responsible for Albany County, Laramie County, and then they do have a larger team that's responsible for the Northern Rockies, and I believe it's Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and I think Colorado also. I'm not 100% sure on the Colorado portion, but they are contracted with the state to be the state mental health provider. The VOA is.
All right. So, and again, as we get into this and learn how to do it, I want to make sure that we utilize the mental health consultants that we have within Albany County before we reach out to Oklahoma and to Colorado and to other places, and keep this funding within the city as much as we can. And I know that there's at Ivinson Hospital and other places where there are mental health counselors. I just don't want to get to the point where it's easiest to just make that $300 phone call to Oklahoma. So that's my comment.
Please, Chief.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I actually had an opportunity to meet with one of our local counselors last week, and I was curious on his perspective with this program, and also on the possibility of partnering up for an actual in-person response in this community and what his take would be on it. And this individual specifically said part of the problem is really the hours. Is that finding a healthcare provider, a mental health provider that's going to work 24/7, similar to that of what police officers do, is really what we run into the problem with, or even be available for calls for service at the rates that we provide. The benefit to using a larger entity like the VOA is that they have different levels of mental health response. So they have caseworkers, clinicians, psychologists, and depending on the situation, they have access to all of those resources where we might not necessarily have access to those in our community or on a consistent basis in our community. But I agree with you 100%. Anything that we can spend in this community should be spent in this community. And when we have the availability to recognize those resources, we intend to do so.
Thank you, Chief. And Councilor Newman, I'm going to go to Councilor Councilor Somerville, rather, because this is her motion.
Absolutely.
Councilor Somerville, I saw your hand come down, but if you did have something you'd like to add there, the floor is yours.
Mayor, I guess just a few things. I think the chief has touched on it really well, but to Councilor Shumway's point about 988, it is a phenomenal resource that is not built out yet, to be frank, nationwide. It is operating in Wyoming. We do have those services operating, but it functions through a different system right now. It does not cross with 911. Whether that will happen in the future is a huge question that's out there right now. So I hope you don't think it's duplicative. We just don't have the ability to cross those resources over yet. And then to the point of a local provider, certainly I'm a huge fan of trying to make sure we do as much in Albany County as we can. And whether that is the VOA or it's another provider, I think that's important. The VOA is actually headquartered in Sheridan, Wyoming, and they are responsible for Wyoming, South Dakota, and Montana is their service area. They do have pretty vast resources, but they break it up into regions. And so our region for the VOA is Albany County, Laramie County, Platte County, and Goshen County. And so we have a pretty large foothold in that region here in Laramie, and the idea that we could access those additional kind of multi-tiered resources as locally as possible is pretty, I think, important to making sure that we get people services and we get the best service as possible. I am in full agreement. I would rather avoid the random phone calls to Oklahoma or, Tennessee or wherever some random provider might be. I think our best system is to build that as close to Albany County as we can. So, Mayor, I would also add, if the chief only wants $50,000 right now, then I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that we have enough resources for this fiscal year to work on the pilot project and make sure that, as Councilor Newman pointed out, iPads could be bought and that those resources are there just in case we cannot backfill these for some reason if the other funding doesn't materialize.
Thank you, Councilor
Thank you.
Somerville. Councilor Newman?
I have an amendment. Do I do that
Please.
now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to make an amendment, and I would like the motion to read, I move that the Laramie City Council approve a budget amendment in the general fund for a mental health response program to include telebehavior health in the amount not to exceed $100,000 with an additional $20,000 for technology, including phones and iPads, starting in the fiscal year 2024.
Second.
Motion and a second. Council members, any discussion? Yeah, Councilor Newman.
So my reasoning is, let's say this fund costs $51,000 for whatever reason. I don't want the chief to come back for $1,000. I want him to just continue. I also don't want to pull some of that money for the technology, if we can just approve that as well, to where now you have funds for both of them. And I think going forward, that would be a wise decision for us.
Thank you, Councilor Newman. Councilor Pierce.
So you said $100,000 plus an additional 20. Did you mean 50 plus an additional 20? So you're still wanting to keep it at 100 plus an additional 20,000?
Correct, just in case he goes just without the technology, if it goes over 50,000, I don't want him to come back here. So if we can just make that 100 and then plus the extra 20 because he said it would only be, 10,000 for the technology. So I'm kind of giving him a little leeway on that as well.
Any other questions, council members? Yeah, Councilor Richardson.
If this amount were not to be, well, never mind, I answered it myself, because it's for the 2024 budget, so it would not roll over to 2025.
Correct.
Thank you.
Council members, I would note that anything we assign here cannot be assigned anywhere else in our budget. So if we add $70,000 beyond what the chief has asked for in this, what we need to consider is if Public Works wants a grant match for something later in the year, this $70,000 that we have assigned over the request from staff on this is not eligible for that. So we should weigh the benefits of having the chief come back to a meeting, or the sort of like staff cost there, and the sort of like hamstringing of ourselves that we may do on grant applications later. I just want to note that, and then I'll move to you, City Manager.
Mayor, thank you. I just want to make sure that we are all clear on what is contained within the chief's $50,000 recommendation. Chief, my understanding is that all of the tablets and the technology equipment is contained already in the $50,000. Am I right or wrong?
That's correct.
Okay. I wanted to be clear because if that wasn't clear to council, we don't want to be unclear to you or to the public. So that $50,000 includes acquisition of equipment, including internet, all of that.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. Typically, I think Brandon and I would be in favor, but because the chief said he feels like he only needs 50, I would be okay with just that, with that 100. And that seems like it was budgeted for. It's been kind of thought through by staff. And then, again, if something more was needed, coming back at that point. But going above, because the chief said he only needed 50, I do think some of these things tend to cost more than we think they do once you get going. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions, council members? Okay. We will go to the public on this amendment, to the amendment. Any member of the public wishing to speak to this amendment, please raise your hand on Zoom or come forward if you're in the room. Okay. Back to the council for any comments before we vote. Councilor Shumway.
I will vote no on this amendment. I would support 50,000 total. I won't support 120,000.
Thank you, council member. Any other comments? Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, I agree with Councilor Shumway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments, Council? City Clerk, you can call the roll.
Gabriel?
No.
Newman?
Yes.
O'Doherty?
No.
Pierce?
No.
Richardson?
No.
Shumway?
No.
Somerville?
Yes.
Cumby?
No.
And Harrington.
No.
Okay, that is 2 yeses and 7 no, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That amendment has been rejected. Yeah. Yes, Vice Mayor,
Propose a second amendment, another amendment,
please.
an alternative. That would read, I move that the Laramie City Council approve a budget amendment in the general fund for a mental health response program to include telebehavioral health in an amount not to exceed $50,000 starting in fiscal year 2024.
Second.
Motion by Vice Mayor Cumby, second by O'Doherty. Council members, any discussion on this amendment? Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. After listening to Councilor Newman, I would prefer that the chief have a little wiggle room on this, getting all of this started. We are talking about an entire year. I would be appreciative if the council would vote down this motion and support a motion for 75. And just give a little bit of extra funds so that he can build the program out and apply for contingencies and balance the mayor's comments about not tying up too much in funding. So I'll be a no on this amendment, and I hope the council would support an amendment for 75. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Somerville. Any other discussion, Council? Councilor Richardson, Councilor Newman next.
Thank you. I agree with Councilor Somerville that there needs to be a little more wiggle room. When you think that $15,000 is going to technology, that doesn't leave a whole lot for programming after that. For our city and the needs that are there, I would like to have a little more wiggle room than just the 50.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Newman.
Correct me if I'm wrong, so Councilor Somerville's original motion is still on the floor too for the 100, right?
Yeah, as it sits now, Council Member, what we are discussing is whether or not to change it to 50,000. A yes vote changes it to 50,000. A no would keep it at 100.
I just have a comment then. I'm going to mirror the same thing that Councilor Richardson said. I'm going to vote no on this.
Okay. Thank you, Council Member. Any other questions or comments, Council? Please.
I have a comment. I'd be perfectly fine with 50 or even 75. The bottom line is I have this sense that we're all very supportive of these efforts. So if we okay 50 now, please come back to us for, if you need more money, because we are very supportive of these efforts. So, and I think we can do that pretty quick, right? If we need to do it quickly, add another 10 or 25,000 or whatever it happens to be. So either way, I think we're good. I don't think we need to, get all excited about the difference right now. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes on this, and if it doesn't work, I'll say yes the next time.
Thank you, Council Member. Any other comments or questions, Councilor O'Doherty?
I'd like to hear from staff about how, if we encumber these funds, the kind of, that got me worried when you said that. So something big happens and we need those funds to not be tied up somewhere else. Does that make staff nervous if we do that? They're so easygoing.
There is some head shaking. City Manager, please.
Mayor and Council, I think certainly both sides of the discussion have merit. When we tie up the funds, as the mayor said, they're not available for other uses. I also appreciate the approach of council to try to make sure that there are adequate resources for staff to work with to get this rolling. We're really talking about a difference of 50 to 25,000 here that would come out of cash and become sort of encumbered to this use. So I think what I will say, looking at Jen, we have sufficient cash, and we will defer to council's wisdom on this. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager and Director Wade. Councilor Shumway.
Appreciate the confidence that the city manager has in us. I will defer to the wisdom of our chief of police, and I'm going to support the $50,000. It is very easy to make a budget amendment, and we can move very quickly as a city council to do that. And so I want to start with their recommended $50,000, so I will be in support of this amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Shumway. Any other comments, council, on the amendment? We will move to members of the public. Any member wishing to speak to this item can go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. Back to council for one last shot at it. Councilmember Pierce.
Yes. You know, what I've learned with things related to mental health and in our community in Wyoming, this is hard work, right? This is extremely hard work. And I appreciate everybody's efforts in our state and our community to try to help, right? So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. I will be supporting the $50,000 as well, and I think, Chief, it's probably loud and clear at this point that you should feel very welcome. I think this is a cause that this entire council feels very strongly about, and it has meaningful impact on members of the public. Our constituents will see tangible benefits from this program. So I continue to think this is a high priority for the council, and please come back if you need more funding. If this is approved, Councilor Somerville, I see your hand is up, and then Councilor Richardson next.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just ask the council to please think about the process that we have in place to come back and get funds. And to the conversation about other priorities, I think that the message we send to the community about how important this is very important. And ensuring that there are adequate funds there are important. And I do appreciate the city's ability to run on a shoestring budget, but this is a pilot program. This will be built over the next couple of months and be put in place. And I think we do a disservice to the city and the residents by severely limiting that budget when we have the cash on hand to make sure that we have adequate funding. I don't think that, having listened to the council, it seems clear to me that about $75,000 is kind of splitting the middle of where everybody is at on everything in terms of getting some funding going. So I guess I would just ask the council and the council members to rethink that as you vote on whether to restrict this program to only $50,000. And keep in mind, it's not a super fast process to come back to the council. And there are always other priorities that come before us as well. So we need to decide how big of a priority this is for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Richardson. Okay. Vice Mayor?
I just want to say that I appreciate Councilor Somerville, your proposal kind of splitting the difference. And I also appreciate Councilor Richardson's comment, and that just keeps echoing in my mind. Once you get into programming and you begin to need those additional funds, this could lead directly to increased programming. And I'm starting to think that the 75 gives that leeway to get things set up and concurrently begin to move into more advanced programming without having to pause, come back here. So I'm going to vote against it now.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other questions or comments?
And Mayor, this is on 50 we're voting on, correct?
Yes, a yes vote is 50,000, a no is 100 at this point. Okay, City Clerk, you can call the roll on the amendment.
Okay, Somerville,
No.
Shumway,
Yes.
Richardson,
No.
Pierce,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
No.
Newman,
No.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Cumby,
No.
and Harrington.
Yes.
That is 4 yeses and 5 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has been rejected. Council members, back to you all. Who would like to make this? Councilor Somerville, I see your hand is up. We're going to move.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. As promised, I would move to amend the motion to reduce the amount from $100,000 to $75,000.
Second.
Okay, motion by Somerville, second by Newman. Council members, any comments, questions? Thank you all for the brevity. Members of the public, any member of the public wishing to speak, go ahead and come forward or raise your hand on Zoom. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment period back to the council. Councilor Shumway.
I will support this because the next motion would be to increase it to 100,000, and I think that's excessive.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, City Clerk, you can call the roll on the amendment. A yes vote is to 75,000 and no is 100.
Pierce,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Gabriel,
No.
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That is 8 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has been approved. We are back to the main motion, council members.
As amended.
As amended, thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay. Moving to the public, any members of the public wishing to speak to this amendment as amended? Go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. Council members, okay, City Clerk, you can call the roll on this amendment.
Okay. Newman,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Shumway,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
and Harrington.
Yes.
There's 9 yeses, 0 no.
Thank you, City Clerk. Budget Amendment 3 has been adopted. Councilor Somerville, Amendment 4 is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I will try to make this one much quicker. I move that the Laramie City Council approve an amendment to the fiscal year 2024-2018 SPT fund budget, allocating up to $75,000 from the 2018 specific purpose tax, community, and gateway enhancement funds for beautification, including a banner system and landscaping, in conjunction with the Curtis Street and I-80 interchange project.
Second.
Motion by Somerville, second by Gabriel. Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. This motion, after speaking with staff, is not general fund. It is, as it states, SPT funds from the SPT tax that was approved in 2018. In that tax that the voters approved, there's $1 million for beautification. This $75,000 would come out of that $1 million pot of money. All of the council is aware, or if you've recently tried to travel in West Laramie, are aware that WYDOT has demolished the Curtis Street Bridge and is well underway in the replacement of that bridge on that I-80 interchange section. The pandemic, just from my perspective, the pandemic created a lot of issues with planning with this project. In terms of communication and maybe not getting in front of it the way we needed to be. From a council perspective, it's a 100-year project, and we usually, we get one opportunity to try to make some improvements with those projects, as we know the state will only pay for so much. If the council would remember, we did something similar in terms of trying to make some improvements when, I don't know if you want to call it the Harney Range Bridge or the Snowy Range Bridge or whatever we call it, was constructed and completed a few years ago with some enhancements, namely a banner system where banners can be hung by the city or city partners, and then some additional landscaping. This $75,000 is intended to do something similar, but probably not to the same scope as we did with the previous bridge project. The intent, and after speaking with Public Works, would be to go ahead and put this money in the budget and then give Public Works the flexibility to either work with WYDOT as WYDOT constructs the bridge, although the bridge deck will be done hopefully in about 90 days. The majority of the project, the landscaping, the other pieces will probably not be done until late next spring. And so giving the Public Works Department the flexibility to either work with YDOT as they complete the project, or secondarily, to include this in the Pierce and Curtis Street intersection, which is just west of the bridge. That reconstruction project is a city project that got delayed for a number of years due to funding levels from the pandemic. And that is, as you noted in the capital budget, that is back on track for design this year and construction in 25, and give the Public Works Department the flexibility to work on that landscaping or banner system, either with YDOT or with our own project moving forward. I think it's just a good opportunity to add a little bit of enhancement to a project, to a major project that we won't see again in our community in quite some time. Mayor, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any questions, Council? Councilor Richardson, please.
Sorry for my ignorance. What's a banner system?
Mayor and Councilor Richardson, if you go over the Snowy Range Viaduct, you'll see on the light poles there, I don't know how big they are, maybe 12 inches tall, actual banners that get hung on each of the light poles that can be changed out. So right now, I think on that bridge, there's UW banners maybe still. And so those can be changed out for a season or an event or something along those lines.
Thank you.
Council members, Councilor Shumway.
The YDOT has a fund for this. They had one for the Harney Street Bridge, and by us allocating $75,000, I'm sure that they will take that into account, and I would rather have them pay the entire amount and then have us take a look. We're responsible for Curtis Street. They're responsible for I-80, and this also, they're 100% responsible for the bridge that goes over I-80. So before we start putting banners up that would be used by the university or whoever, I want to make sure that we know what the allocation is from YDOT to do landscaping, banners, and any other beautification that they have for this project.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Shumway, to your point, so YDOT has already designed and essentially encumbered and spent all of their funds for this project. What is a little different from the Harney project is that they had additional enhancement money when we did the project for the Snowy Range Bridge. They do not have that this time. So they're essentially 1% of a state project has to be spent on enhancements or public art or something like that. For this project, that is the fencing. So the fencing is not chain link fencing or anything like that. It's going to be very similar to what is on the Snowy Range Bridge. And then the actual lighting system is where the money is. In addition, YDOT is, as part of that bridge project, creating a larger multi-use path on one side of the bridge. And then there is some, what in my opinion is relatively minor landscaping with the project, but then they put the rest of the funds in landscaping. So YDOT has already allocated, and they've done or prescribed in their project what they're going to do. There's no additional YDOT funds to do anything else. They would have to come from the city or the county or somewhere else.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Newman.
How did we come up with the $75,000 for this amendment, or this motion, I'm sorry? Was it just staff? Was it you, Councilor Somerville?
Mayor and Councilor Newman, so that's my estimate. So approximately $50,000 for landscaping and $25,000 for the banner system. The banner system was just, it's a little bit rough in the estimate for that because the lights are a little bit different than the Snowy Range system, but it was after conversations that I had with YDOT on both of those items.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Doherty.
Isn't this outside the city limits?
Councilor Somerville.
Mayor and Councilor Doherty. So yes, the actual bridge deck is outside the city limits, as are pieces of the, what do you want to call them? The off-ramps and the on-ramps are technically in the county, but the city line comes up right to the bridge deck. If I had a map it's the strangest thing you've ever seen in the world. What I would point out is, like the Snowy Range Bridge, this entire Curtis Street Bridge section is YDOT's. It's YDOT right away. We did the same thing with the Snowy Range Bridge. All of that is YDOT right away. And then the city of Laramie has whatever maintenance agreements or whatever come into effect for adding that additional, or for how things are maintained. So this would be, I'm envisioning, after my discussion with Public Works, would be done exactly the same way. But you are technically correct. The bridge deck itself is actually in the county.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Newman.
I think my question would be for Director Webb. Is this a project that the city would want to take on if funded?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Newman. You know, the SPT funding that was designed was for beautification in those areas, gateways, entryways, and that. So it's something that the city has been looking forward to. I think we have to do some assessment and see if we can, what we end up with, if we can maintain it through some kind of contractual arrangement with a professional company to take on that. But without knowing exactly what that landscaping is going to look like, it's hard to say whether it be intense maintenance or not intense maintenance. I can direct you how many people have seen the interchange in Sheridan where they put in with Weatherby. You know, a landscape like that, first off, $75,000 isn't even going to touch, and second off, it's not something that I would have interest in the city maintaining at that point. But depending on what we end up with, we could maintain or find a way to maintain that.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager. City Manager.
Mayor, if I could just tag on to that. I do want council to know that it is staff's understanding when this bridge design was reviewed a number of years, the city exercised its right to seek what, you know, the bureaucratic language at the Fed and state is CSA, context-sensitive amenities, and the 1% for beautification. So we believe that YDOT did maximize that. Now, Councilor Somerville's correct. It doesn't go this step further to maybe have to be added and were added. Right, Brooks? Okay, just want to make sure I didn't misspeak. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Council members, Councilor Richardson, please.
Thank you. So, Director Brooks, if we were to wait until all of this was built, or Assistant City Manager Fieser, would it make more sense to do the work on it, like plan and get the work in place and set now? Or would it do, and I guess the other question is, if we waited a year to see what this ends up looking like and allocate money, then is that more work in the long run because you're not taking advantage of what's already torn up and that sort of thing? Does it work in conjunction, I guess, with the?
Thank you, Councilman.
I don't know, Mayor, through you, I don't know if I'm the best one or if Todd's the best one to answer. But in our talks with YDOT about beautification, is their feeling is working with them during the Curtis Street project that's occurring right now, that ship has sailed. So if we want to do something later, that will be on us to do later. Now, they'll have to permit that and allow that, which we can work through with them and won't be an issue. But as far as during the project that they're doing right now, that ship sailed. So yes, this would be a project that we would do basically right after they complete, we would come in. And I think the good thing about that is we get to see exactly what they're putting in and what's needed to go in. Councilor Somerville did mention the Curtis Pierce intersection project. That was something I talked with her about. We have that project for construction in 2025, and so during design, which will start in fiscal year 24, it may make sense, since it's right in that same area, to roll some landscape design in there, and we can work with Todd on that through that process and just kind of have that done as one part of the project. But so I don't know, does that help? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions? Forgive me. Any other questions, council members? I have a couple. Director Wade, I have a question for you. If we, given Director Webb's just recent conversation, or his, the comment on the $75,000 now and then a 2025 project, we would be assigning funding now that would inherently be rebudgeted twice before we spend it. Is that right? At a minimum?
Honorable Mayor, the timing of the spending would not be something I could weigh in on, but we would rebudget it until it was spent within the community enhancements portion of the tax, which is different from the portion that will actually fund Director Webb's project in Public Works.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm going to go back to Councilor Somerville if she has a comment there, and then to you, Councilor Newman. Councilor Somerville?
I apologize, technology is not cooperating. Mayor, to that point, if the preference of the Public Works Department is to maybe look at this and include it in design, that they'll be starting fiscal year 24, which starts July 1 of this year, then they may potentially need some of those dollars or that direction from council that we would like to include these things. And so even though a majority or all of the money may eventually get rebudgeted into FY25, depending on the timing of Public Works, it would make sense to me to be able to give the staff that direction that, hey, we do want to do this. And again, since it's SPT money, I think that bar is lower in terms of tying up funds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Newman? Okay. Director Wade, did you have a comment there?
After Councilmember Newman.
He passed on his opportunity, so it's all yours.
I would like to note for the council in our evaluation of this amendment that the additional $75,000 appropriation, we do have collections on hand. There isn't a project this is butting up against. And so if that helps the council in your deliberations, rebudgeting the funding, there is still sufficient reserve in place. If there are additional beautification efforts that qualify under the ballot language, there is still some wiggle room. And so I just want to offer that to help you in your conversation.
Thank you, Director. I had one other question. Because this mentions specifically including a banner system and landscaping, is a banner system, I don't know who this question is for, but this would require us to have a banner system of some variety as a part of this project, as well as landscaping. And they have made decisions on the bridge already about what light poles are installed, what, sort of like railings are installed. And I have a concern in the back of my mind that maybe that is not an option. And so I would hate for us to put money in here. And yeah, sure, we could get around it by putting like a post in the ground and one banner on it, but that feels kind of foolish, right? So I don't know if anybody on staff, I see Councilor Somerville has her hand up, but I was curious about that portion. And seeing nobody jump to answer that question, Councilor Somerville, I'm going to you for it.
Thanks, Mayor. To that exact question, in my conversations with our district engineer and the direct engineer for this project, they both think that is possible. The lighting poles are just a little bit different than the ones that are on the Snowy Range Bridge, so the banner system might be just a little bit different, but they do believe it is possible.
Thank you, Council Member. And then the other question, sorry, Council, to belabor this, but when the Snowy Range Viaduct was built, we assigned that additional funding that Councilor Somerville talked about. And you might recall, I think the dollar amount was $150,000 to extend a slight portion of railing down the bridge. And so I am concerned that $75,000 may be insufficient for any sort of like real physical thing. And I generally, I think this sort of beautification is important, and I think it is worth us investing in. I just don't know if the funding is sufficient for sort of like the dream scenario to happen here, and we all know this won't be the that interchange that's in Sheridan. We know it just won't be that. So I worry that we start looking at a banner system on a bridge, and we realize quickly that we have 12 poles or something that can have a banner on them, or 4 poles, and we have spent $75,000. And so, without knowing the specifics of that, I have some apprehension about specifically including a banner system, though I can see the value in having a banner system on that bridge. So that leaves us nowhere. Of course, I don't get to make any motions, so my opinion may be just a waste of everyone's time. And so I'm going to leave it there and go to you, Councilor Somerville, and then to you, Councilor Richardson.
Mayor, if it would put your mind at ease, I would be willing to amend the motion to say and/or banner system and landscaping, or provide some flexibility. Certainly it is not my intent. If for some reason that just doesn't work, or this becomes more large scale, I think the staff would need to come back to us and have that conversation. I got the best estimates that I could after talking to WYDOT. I do agree. I wish it was a whole lot more money. But again, knowing the funds that are available, I didn't want to just come and, tie up $200,000 of SPT money. So if it would make you feel better, more comfortable with it, I'd be happy to change that language to include options such as a banner system and landscaping, or banner system and landscaping, or something like that.
Out of curiosity, council member, what about striking the entire banner system and landscaping
For beautification.
contained in the commas, that entire section?
Beautification.
Leaving it at beautification.
For beautification.
Yeah, Mayor, I would ask my second if they would be up for a friendly amendment to just take out including a banner system and landscaping, and just leave it at beautification.
Thank you, council member. I have a nod from Councilor Gabriel that.
I agree.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so City Clerk, did you follow that enough to have that noted friendly amendment? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Council Member Somerville. Council, do we have any more? Director Webb, something to add?
If I could.
Please.
Mayor, I was just consulting with the
Yeah,
assistant
please.
city manager.
Yeah.
One of the things we were thinking about was going back to that Curtis Pierce intersection project. One of the things we could do, not knowing that price right now, is when we go out for RFQ to get the design going on the Pierce Curtis Street intersection, we could ask for a separate price through our RFQ process on the landscaping piece itself. Okay? And then when we come to you, we can come to with that as an alternate. We can tell you the design of the Pierce Curtis industry is going to cost this much. Do you want to award the alternate for the landscaping also? If you do want to move forward with that, we know the cost of that design, and then once that design is completed and we bid the project out, we can come back to you, we can bid the alternate for the landscape, and so then you'll know the price on the additional landscaping also. If that makes sense.
City Manager, and then to the council members, Doherty and Richardson, in that order.
Mayor, just to piggyback on what the director has noted, I also think there's a lot of merit to that, and I'll tell you why. I was just looking up the cost on the Harney Street additional improvements that we did, and it looks like, looking at budget, that came out to be around $550,000 when it was all said and done. And that was certainly not where we started the conversation, not even much like this in 2019. I would let you know, in the budget that you are approving tonight, we've recommended the $40,000 for design of the Pierce Curtis Street intersection, as Mr. Webb has just told you, with an eventual estimated cost to construct of $485,000, I think, without my glasses. So, we're talking real money here, and I like the notion to have it designed and then bring it as an alternate, and then you all really know what you're getting into. And what I'm hearing from you, and I think all of the staff are hearing that, is if there is the will of council to pursue that, we understand that you want something that is landscape and beautification that likely exceeds what is required in city code, and maybe banner systems or something of that sort that would be mirroring to or complementary to what we put on Harney Street. So if I misstated that, please correct me, but that's the kind of thing we could ask our design folks to work on.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Doherty.
So the amendment that's before us just says for beautification in conjunction with the Curtis Street, and I I like it to just be beautification, because I'm not comfortable that we're doing the landscaping on land that's owned by the state, and I assume on the east side of it, it's owned by the state. Part of it, I mean, I don't see the point of irrigating and things like that in a dry climate. So if we just leave it at beautification, we're going to put $75,000. Somebody can come up with something beautiful. We have creative people in town. So I hope that we can just pass it like that. And
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilor Richardson.
So I would just like to say I like the idea of combining things. It feels like, while I would really like to get that beautification done, it would be nice to see what the product is to finish with and what else needs to happen, and then allocate those dollars, in my opinion.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you. So I like the idea. I'm just going to vote no on this. And when we go through this again, when the bid comes out, I would certainly ask that we include up to or close to, or, this particular area. So, because it needs it needs something, right?
Thank you, Councilmember. And by way of clarification, maybe from staff, would you, if we would like you to bring additional landscaping beyond sort of requirements with that design, do we need to adopt this amendment? Or can we just ask you that on gateways you bring additional requirements, or you exceed requirements as an option?
Well, they're corresponding, I'll let you know, councilors. On gateways, our code does have enhanced requirements already above what normal beautification and landscape is required elsewhere in the city. Because part of this is not in the city, right? It becomes confusing. But I guess what we would say is we would apply the landscape beautification requirement for a gateway, and then also the additional elements that we hear you talking about, banners and celebratory kind of placemaking items.
Thank you. Councilor Somerville.
Did you guys decide?
Sorry, Councilor Somerville, we're going to go to Director Webb first and then back to you.
Sure.
Yeah, Mayor, is what we would do at this point is when we bring the item back to you, we would amend it at that point.
Thank you, Director Webb. Councilor Somerville.
Mayor, I just wanted to be clear. So we can vote this down tonight, but staff will bring the design item that'll include these items forward. If that's the case, I'm entirely fine with that.
Councilor Somerville, that's correct. So we're going to move.
Okay, thank you.
At that point, we're going to move to members of the public. Any member of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, I will close the public comment period back to the council on this. Councilor Shumway.
I would like to have clarification eventually that this is city property instead of county property.
It is not city property, Councilor.
It's county.
It's state. The state of Wyoming owns it.
State is the bridge, but I'm talking about the Curtis Street, the entryways. Are all the entryways, exits, and on-ramps and off-ramps, are they county or city?
State.
State.
Okay, state. Okay, and then, so our beautification would be on state, the state bridge, okay.
You are correct. Okay. Thank you, City Clerk. Okay. You all can see the carve out up here. Okay. We are going to go ahead and go to the roll, City Clerk. Thank you for putting that up.
All right, Gabriel?
No?
Newman?
No.
O'Doherty?
No.
Pierce?
No.
Richardson?
No.
Shumway?
No.
Somerville?
No.
Cumby?
No.
Harrington?
No.
That is 0 yeses and 9 no, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. We can sure spend a lot of time getting nowhere. Okay. Council, sorry, members, motion number 4 has failed. We will move on to motion number 5. Councilor Somerville, and before you go, I know you brought that one. We didn't go nowhere. That was an important conversation. I just want to note that for you.
We're not going over the bridge yet. Right. Well, Mayor, I'll just say that this is 10% of the money in the last motion, so we'll see how this goes. I move to approve $7,500 to the fiscal year 2024 general fund budget to support the Shepherd Symposium on Social Justice, as well as related Matthew Shepard commemoration events coordinated by the University of Wyoming.
Second.
Motion by Somerville, seconded by Pierce. Councilor Somerville, give us a quick run through of this one.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. So I'll just start off by saying, ideally, in the future, these kind of requests need to come through and be part of the Community Partners Program. The University of Wyoming, or I guess I shouldn't even say the University of Wyoming, I should say groups in the University of Wyoming approached me, and I think they talked to a couple other council members as well, as wanting to see if the city would be willing to support some of their activities. The Shepherd Symposium on Social Justice is being moved to the fall permanently. And then this year, they will be doing 25th year commemoration events for Matthew Shepard. Just a bit of history. The last time I believe that the city gave funding to supporting any of this was about 5 years ago for the 20th commemoration of Matthew Shepard. So I would like the council to consider a one-time $7,500 appropriation tonight, and then some direction that they should come forward and be part of the Community Partners Program going forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, council member. Any questions, council? Councilor Newman.
I just have a comment, not a question, just something to think about. If we approve this, which I don't have a problem doing, to be honest, but are we going to open the door for other people to get kind of like a gray area back door around the community partner program to where they're just going to come to us for a motion like this? So,
thank you, councilor. Any other questions or comments, council? Yeah, Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. Councilor Somerville, did they offer like a sponsorship, like leveled sponsorships?
Mayor and Councilor Richardson, they did not have anything. They just approached and asked if the city would be willing to provide some funding in support of the activities that they're doing. I don't know that I've seen anything like you're describing yet from that group. One can hope that we might see that in the future. And Councilor Richardson, and for the council, I believe if memory serves me correctly, we gave them $8,000 5 years ago.
Thank you, Councilor Somerville. Council, any other questions or comments here? Seeing none, we're going to go to the public. Any member of the public wish to speak to this item, please go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom or come forward in the room. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period back to the council. Any comments before the vote? Okay. City Clerk, you can call roll.
Somerville,
Yes.
Shumway,
No.
Richardson,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Newman,
no.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Cumby,
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That is 7 yeses and 2 no, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has been approved. That takes care of the supplemental budget amendments. Council members, good work. We will go to Councilor Pierce for 1D.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I move that we adjourn the special meeting and convene the work session.
Second.
Motion by Pierce, second by Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the special meeting has been adjourned. We are now in our work session. Council members, it is 8 o'clock. I'm going to ask that we take 5 minutes. Well, let's make this something. We're going to be back here at 8:05. 7 minutes, council.
I almost said cancel.
Just groove on. Back in session. We are going to go ahead and begin our work session, the auditor's report to City Council. Director Wade.
Good evening again, Council. As we enter our work session, you're going to hear the report from one of our audit partners on the fiscal year 2022 audit. And so, as you know, our audit was delayed this year because our prior firm said they could not provide the service very late in the game. And so we just wrapped up our 2022 audit, and we'll get started on our 2023 audit in about a month. And so with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Micah, who will provide his report to you, the governing body, and then after his work is complete, I will join you again for a brief overview, and I mean brief, of the ACFR.
Appreciate that, Director Wade. Micah, welcome, and thank you for sitting through that and being here to give us something that will probably be a pretty labor or mentally taxing on us this late. So we appreciate it. And the floor is yours.
Absolutely. I guess I want to check to make sure that you can hear me.
It's a little fuzzy, but yes.
A little fuzzy, but yes. Is that a little better?
Can we turn it up a little bit?
We're going to see if we can turn it up in our room real fast.
All right.
And otherwise, we'll be okay.
All right. Hopefully that's a little better.
Does everybody feel okay? Well enough?
I'll talk really loud.
That would be helpful, I think, in this situation.
There we go.
Ooh, that's great.
I actually just cracked open my computer, so hopefully that helped a little bit. So I have my big screens and
It
plus
did.
my computer.
Significantly better. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, first and foremost, thank you for your time this evening, and it was good for me to be able to sit through and listen to the supplemental budget talks, and so I'm very happy to be here with you all this evening. It's good to be with you, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, and City Manager. If we can move to the next screen. I'm just going to give a brief update and just go through the results of our audit. As you can see here on this slide, here's a table of contents. And I'll go through these different areas. First, we'll go through kind of a welcome, and I'll actually spend a little time to read through that actual letter because it's some required information that we are required to communicate to those charged with governance, or i.e. the Honorable Mayor, members of Council, and City Manager. The executive summary will be brief. That is where I'll just kind of discuss the status and the results of the audit. And then we'll spend a little bit of time just discussing internal control over financial reporting, the single audit, which is just the audit of the federal grant awards or expenditures that the city had received for fiscal year 22. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with just some other required communications that we are required to communicate to those charged with governance under our auditing standards. So we can move on to the next slide. As I just mentioned, I'd like to just kind of read through this because I think it's important that we do take the time to go through this. As noted in the first paragraph, professional standards require us to communicate with you regarding matters related to the financial statement audit that are, in our professional judgment, significant and relevant to your responsibilities in overseeing the financial reporting process. As noted in this paragraph, we previously met with Council on January 24th, 2023. We presented an overview of our plan for the audit at that time for the city's financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022. And as part of that discussion, we also included a summary of our overall objectives for the audit and the nature and scope of the planned audit work. This communication here this evening is intended to elaborate on the significant findings or results from our audit, including our views on the qualitative aspects of the city's accounting practices and policies, management's judgments and estimates that may be found in the annual financial statements, in addition to financial disclosures and other required matters. So with that, if we could move on to the next slide, please. And then the next one. So we have completed our audit of the financial statements as of and for the year ended June 30th, 2022 for the city of Laramie. Our audit was conducted in accordance with two different sets of auditing standards. First and foremost, auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, and then also under government auditing standards, given the fact that the city of Laramie is a municipality. This audit of the financial statements does not relieve management or those charged with governance of their responsibilities. And so with that being said, a couple of high points. First and foremost, the objective of our audit was to obtain reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatements. So, for example, we did not look at every single transaction that the city would have done throughout the fiscal year. That would be absolute assurance. Rather, we do provide reasonable assurance, which is consistent with prior years. The scope of the work performed was substantially the same as that described to you in our earlier audit planning meeting back in January with you. And really kind of what we came for is just this last paragraph, just to kind of get it out of the way, is what was our audit opinion? We issued an unmodified opinion, which is what you want. Unmodified means a clean audit opinion. So congratulations to the city and to the management team for that. And we also released our report on May 1st, 2023. Our audit opinion which is similar to the prior year. I believe there was an emphasis of matter paragraph. Our audit opinion included two emphasis of matter paragraphs. The first referred to a change in accounting principles related to the city's implementation of a new accounting standard, GASB statement number 87 related to leases. So these emphasis of matter paragraphs just draws a little more attention to the readers. And so there was that paragraph. And then there was also an emphasis of matter paragraph referring to prior period restatements that were made to correct accounting errors. And we will discuss that a little more here in about 6 or 7 slides. And so if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I know that Director Wade will go through kind of high level the annual financial statements here shortly, or the ACFR, which is also known as the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. The ACFR consists of several different areas. There are the basic financial statements. There are notes to the basic financial statements. There's also certain information that's called the required supplementary information that is found every year within the ACFR. That information consists of, or is comprised of, management's discussion and analysis, which comes right after after our audit opinion and before the basic financial statements. It also consists of certain budgetary comparison information related to the general fund. And then lastly, the final pieces of the required supplementary information, or the RSI, involves certain information related to pensions and to OPEB as well. The reason we bring this up is, in addition to the opinion over the financial statements, we do apply certain limited procedures to RSI, but we do not audit the RSI and do not express or give an opinion on RSI, and that is consistent with previous years under your predecessor auditor. That being said, we do review the RSI to make sure that it's in accordance with the guidelines out there for the different pieces of RSI, and we do ensure that the information that is involved in that RSI, that it does agree with the information provided in the basic financial statements. We were also, as part of our engagement, which would be consistent with previous years, engaged to report on the combining and individual non-major fund financial statements which accompany the financial statements but are not considered RSI. And so this is it's about page 150 to page 200. There are various combining schedules that then roll up into the basic financial statements. And we do perform certain procedures over this. We perform inquiries. We also perform other procedures to ensure that those numbers, they do tie back to and agree to the basic financial statements, and we give an opinion in relation to the financial statements as a whole. And we're happy to say that that also is kind of a clean opinion, and that the information does tie out and agree to the basic financial statements accordingly. Lastly, kind of the last paragraph on this slide, there are several other sections included in your ACFR. There's an introductory section. There's also a statistical section at the back, in addition to other budgetary comparison schedules for other governmental funds. We do not express an opinion or provide assurance on these, which is similar to the predecessor auditor in previous years. However, we do read that information to ensure that there are no issues, that there's nothing within that information that would contradict the information within the basic financial statements or the notes to the financial statements. If we could please go to the next slide. I kind of stole the thunder of this next slide. What I just discussed was really kind of the second paragraph where we talk about, in accordance with the professional standards, we have read the information included by the City of Laramie and considered whether such information or the manner of its presentation was materially consistent with presentation of the financial statements. And then lastly, just kind of the last paragraph on this tab, our responsibility also includes calling to management's attention any information that we believe is a material misstatement of fact. As we read through that information, we have not identified any material inconsistencies or concluded there are any material misstatements of fact in the other information that management has chosen not to correct. So everything looks good. I'm going to take a little sip of water if you'd bear with me. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. So these next several slides just hit at a high level on just the results of the audit beyond what we already discussed, that they're, the clean opinion over the financial statements. So I'm going to discuss just briefly the accounting practices, policies, and then estimates in the financial statements. The following summarizes the more significant required communications related to our audit concerning the City of Laramie's accounting policies, practices, and estimates. I'd just like to draw your attention to Note 1 in the financial statements. Note 1 is a very important note. It is the note that describes the significant accounting practices and policies of the City of Laramie. We, as part of our audit, we look through those policies, determine whether they're appropriate, whether they're in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles or U.S. GAAP and industry practice. And we're happy to report to you that the information is consistently applied, that it's in accordance with GAAP, and that we did not identify any issues. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the last bullet point on this slide, where it talks about that there were no changes in significant accounting policies and practices during fiscal year 22, other than the city implementing GASB statement number 87 related to leases, which I previously mentioned. If we could move to the next slide, please. So this slide just touches briefly on significant estimates. I'd just like to note or draw attention to the fact that significant estimates are those that require management's subjective or complex judgments, often as a result of the need to make estimates about the effect of matters that are inherently uncertain. The City of Laramie's significant accounting estimates, including a description of management's processes and significant assumptions used in developing the development of estimates, are also disclosed in Note 1 of the financial statements. And then this little table here just provides kind of a high-level summary of some of the estimates that are included in the financial statements. And I'd like to just elaborate a little bit here what we mean by estimates. Oftentimes, when we're looking at cash in the financial statements, that is a pretty easy set number because it's the amount of cash that the city has. However, there are certain numbers or amounts that are disclosed in the financial statements that do require assumptions or estimates to arrive at or estimate the amounts to report in the financial statements. And this is consistent with previous years as well. As you can see here, one of the new ones that is on here this year is GASB 87. all of these other estimates are similar estimates that the city has had in previous years. And a good example of what they mean by estimates, for example, with net pension liabilities or OPEB, the actuaries will take a lot of information and based off of a number of assumptions, go through their models and determine amounts that the city should report on their financial statements for those liabilities. But there are certain numbers in there that for example, they will use a return on an investment. They'll say, oh, we expect in the future the city will receive a return of investment of 7.25% on their investments. And we estimate that the based off historical information that inflation will be 2.5% or which may be laughable at this point in time, but there are those types of numbers which may actually be different than the actual results in the future. Additionally, a couple of other good examples are like the municipal solid waste obligations. There is a liability on the city's books related to what those costs will be in the future for the city to close the landfill, for example, and take care of that post-closure once the landfill is filled up, or for accounts receivable, that there may be some bad debt or amounts that the city might not receive in the future. And so they estimate what the allowances will be. So as the last point notes on this slide, management did not make any significant changes to the processes or significant assumptions used to develop the significant accounting estimates in fiscal year 22. So moving on to the next slide, if we can. Just several areas to highlight. Management's cooperation. We're happy to report that management's cooperation was excellent. If it had not been, we would be required to communicate that to those charged with governance or you, the body that's collected here this evening. We received full access to all the information we requested while performing our audit and acknowledged the full cooperation extended by all the different departments and personnel that we worked with. I really want to give kudos to your team and to the individuals at all of the various departments. Given Director Wade mentioned that the audit was performed a little later than it's historically been done. It overlapped with budget season. It was going on during an implementation of a new ERP system. Despite that, there was a lot of hard work on the management team and personnel throughout the city to help us get through through the audit, and we're very thankful for that. The last item on this slide just relates to management representations. At the conclusion of the audit every year, we request certain representations for management, and we requested that the same day that we issued our audit opinion over the financial statements, which was May 1st, 2023. Now, if we can move to the next slide, please, and I guess even the next one. So we'll briefly discuss internal control over financial reporting. Really, the main thing to point out here is that in planning and performing our audit over the financial statements, we considered, and each year we will consider the City of Laramie's internal control over financial reporting. So internal controls as a basis for designing our audit procedures and for the purpose of expressing our opinions on the financial statements. But the distinction is that we do not do it for the purpose of expressing an opinion over the effectiveness of the City of Laramie's internal controls. And that's really kind of a distinction between public companies, so SEC registrants, where the auditors in those situations are providing an opinion over the effectiveness of those entities' internal controls. That does not happen with governments or in the private sector. And so that's just kind of a key distinction that we like to point out. Our consideration of internal control was for the limited purpose described in that first paragraph, and it was not designed to identify all deficiency in internal control that might be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. As the last paragraph here notes, we are required to communicate in writing to those charged with governance all material weaknesses and significant deficiencies that have been identified, if any, over financial reporting. And then this little table down bottom just gives, it's a table that just provides the definitions of the different categories of deficiencies that may occur in an audit. It starts kind of from less severe to more significant, going down to the bottom. So less severe being kind of a regular control deficiency, and then working its way down to a material weakness. So with that kind of segues into our next slide. And so on this slide, just one item of note to report to the body is that there was a material weakness identified during the current year. It related to other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. I want to just take the time to kind of read through this, because this is a little different than most material weaknesses, if I could add kind of an asterisk by it. You know, the city has a retiree health insurance post-employment benefits plan. Accounting standards for the OPEB plans have been in place for several years, but the city had not previously recorded an OPEB liability for the plan, as it was considered immaterial to the financial statements. However, during early on in fiscal year 2002, and upon reevaluation by the city, it was determined that the city's OPEB liability was actually larger than they had initially estimated, and it was determined to be material to the financial statements. So as a result of that, the city went out, they procured an actuary to then go through the process of determining what that amount was, so that they could put it onto the financial statements and record that amount. The amount, as I mentioned earlier, was a material amount. And so when you do have a material amount that was not previously recorded, you do have a restatement of certain numbers at the beginning of the year. And so it kind of just goes hand in hand, the fact that there was a material restatement related to this OPEB liability to bring it onto the books. It's kind of hand in hand that it resulted in this material weakness. We also wanted to put the views of responsible officials for all of you, so that you can kind of see what the city's response was, that they agreed with this. But the more important thing was that it was identified by the city and corrected by the city, versus us identifying it as part of our audit procedures. And then just with that, we'll kind of segue into the next area. And the next slide, please. As I mentioned when we started, the single audit is what this relates to. Is any entity or government entity, not for profit, that receives and expends over $750,000 of federal expenditures during a year is required to have a compliance audit. As part of that, the city presents a schedule of federal expenditures and federal awards. And as part of the single audit, we consider the city of Laramie's internal control over compliance. So very similar to the financial statement side, as we evaluate and look at those internal controls, we do the same thing for the single audit for internal control over compliance with requirements that could have a direct and material effect on its major federal programs, to determine our auditing procedures for the purpose of expressing an opinion on compliance, and to test and report on internal control over compliance in accordance with government accounting standards and the uniform guidance. The uniform guidance is just kind of the guidance that governs the single audit, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control over compliance. And so I just want to bring your attention to that. So it's very similar and kind of mirrors what we see on the financial statements there. We're happy to report that we issued an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion over the schedule of expenditures of federal awards in relation to the financial statements as a whole. The city, for the year under audit, expended just over $3.4 million in federal expenditures. And as a result of that, it's very formulaic how we determine what we need to audit, and as part of that process, we arrived at auditing the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds program. That comprised about 60 to 63% of the total federal expenditures, which is actually more coverage than you typically get in a single audit. And that was what we audited as a major program for the year ended June 30, 2022. We're happy to report to you all that we tested compliance and internal controls with respect to this program, and that we identified no issues. And so the last section that we'll go through is that we just have some other required communications that we are required to communicate to those charged with governance and management upon the conclusion of our audit. If there had been significant changes to the planned audit strategy or significant risks identified that we did not initially identify and communicate to you as part of our planning session, we would be required to share that with you at this time. We're happy to report that there were no significant changes to the planned audit strategy or significant risks that we initially discussed back in January. Another requirement is for us to obtain information from those charged with governance relevant to the audit. And so as part of our audit, we have discussions and have various inquiries with different individuals. We did not, there were no material matters noted, so relevant to the audit, including but not limited to violations or possible violations of laws or regulations, risks of material misstatement, including fraud risks, and the like. If we had become aware of any such things, we would be required to communicate that to you. We're also, if applicable, would be required to communicate to you the nature and extent of any specialized skills or knowledge needed related to significant risk areas. So, for example, if there was something so significant that we needed to go out and get some outside skills or knowledge to help us with those areas, we'd be required to communicate that to you. There was no such specialized skills or knowledge needed to perform the planned audit procedures related to significant risk areas. And then just moving into the next slide, we would be required to communicate to you if we were to become aware of any consultations with other accountants. This is often referred to as opinion shopping. If we felt that the city maybe was not applying accounting principles in a way consistent with U.S. GAAP, and the city didn't like our what we were saying, and they went out and started shopping around and asking other consultants or accounting firms, hey, what is your opinion on this? We would be required to communicate that. We are not aware of any such consultations or inquiries having occurred by the city. We're also required to communicate significant findings and issues arising during the audit related to any significant related parties of the city. We are not aware of any significant related party relationships or transactions. And then lastly on this tab, or on this slide, would be required to share with you any significant findings or issues that arose during the audit that were discussed or were the subject of correspondence with management that were already not discussed in a previous page, and we did not identify any other things that were significant that would rise to the level that we would feel that we would need to communicate it with you. And then just moving to the last slide, I think this might be our last slide prior to just opening it up to any questions. If there had been any disagreements with management, we would be required to communicate that with you. We're happy to share that we did not have any disagreements with management about any significant matters. Also, if we had encountered any significant difficulties during the audit in regards to obtaining information or just challenges getting through the audit, we would be required to communicate that. As I mentioned earlier, the team and management were fantastic to work with, even despite all the other things they had on their plates. And then lastly, if there were any other contentious items or I feel like we're kind of getting a little redundant, although this is required communications, we'd be required to present that to you, and we're just happy to share that there were no difficult or contentious matters that happened during this year's audit. And I guess there is one more slide, I believe, if we just go to the next slide. If there were any other significant matters that anything that rose to the level that we were like, hey, this could have a very significant impact on the financial statements, or just something unusual perhaps, or significant, that we have not already previously communicated, then we would be required to communicate, and there were no such items. So with that, I would just like to turn it back to you and just open it up for any questions that you might have for myself as it relates to the audit of the city of Laramie for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Klinger. Council members, do you have any questions at this point? Yeah, Councilor Gabriel and then Councilor Doherty.
Thanks, Mayor. Micah, just curious about, you talked about the federal grants, and I can imagine they can be somewhat difficult to understand on all the different requirements. I was curious, do you have to become educated on all of the requirements of a federal grant, or do you rely on city staff to bring you up to date on that?
We really have to stay on top of that stuff on our end. The thing that is nice is that every year the Office of Management and Budget, it kind of is under the purview of the executive branch. They release a compliance, they call it the OMB, Office of Management and Budget Compliance Supplement, where they provide specific information for the majority of any of the large or significant programs where monies are passed through to entities throughout the year. And so that's something that we have to stay on top of every year. And it's really kind of a formulaic process of using grant awards and the guidance that's provided in that to kind of hone in as to what we determine to be the compliance areas that are directed material for any major program that we ended up determined needed to be tested for an entity, or in this case for the city. So
thank you.
So we do a lot of audits.
Thank you. Councilor Doherty.
When you discussed the, I don't know the right term for it, but about the retirees, how that was accounted for, retiree benefits, I believe that's what you told us before this audit started, right? So this is nothing new.
Yeah, so we were aware of that during our meeting back in January, because at that point in time, the city had already identified that this was something that needed to happen. They had already gone out, procured the actuary. They already had the results back and had it actually even restated in the books by the time we started our audit. So that's why I mentioned earlier kind of the little asterisk, that it's a little different than the majority of the material weaknesses that you may end up having in an audit.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Klinger. And Director Wade, we'll head back to you.
Micah, thanks for joining us this evening, and we'll see you in just a few months to start this next round of work.
Thank you.
City Clerk, if you would not mind pulling up our staff's presentation. And so before we dive into a condensed version of the presentation I have for you this evening, I have some really exciting news to share with you. Despite the rather elusive nature of qualified accounting and finance professionals in the world these days, I think we may be dying out. We actually have a finance manager at the City of Laramie now. You may have noticed her. Jennifer Malmborg is actually sitting beside me this evening. I am so happy to, as is Louise. We are just thrilled that she's on the team. Jennifer is hardworking, technically competent, bright, all of the things that you would want in finance leadership. She comes to us with 15 years of experience performing professional accounting services and 10 years of experience managing accounting operations. She comes from the construction and consulting industries, and so this is an industry switch for her, and I could not be happier because I think government needs folks like Jennifer. And I do have to tell you this joke. For a long time, Malia has been saying, Jennifer, you need to find another Jennifer. And I totally did, which is not surprising given when we probably were both born. But however, we're just so happy. Jennifer has an undergraduate degree in accounting. She also just completed her MBA. And when you see her around, welcome her. And I think I finally feel, Louise finally feels like we will be okay through the many years of change that are ahead of us. So we're welcome, Jennifer. Now, for our annual ACFR presentation. So the goal of this presentation is to make the ACFR appealing and not scary. And it's really hard to figure out how to do that. Because you know, accounting can be dry. These financial reports are really long. And so the idea is to really introduce the council and members of the public who may be watching to the report and get your interest piqued, or at least make it accessible. City Clerk, if you actually could move on to the first slide. The first thing I should, actually the next one, because we're gonna just go roll right through this. What I would like to reinforce is one of the things you heard our audit partner tell you, that the amounts on our balance sheet and income statement are staff's responsibility. The ACFR is staff's responsibility. Knowing GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, that's on staff to implement accounting standards. I think there's a misconception that somehow auditors come in and they do this work. And like Micah said, really that's not their role. They have to be independent. And as an example of that, this year we had 2 major implementations. Louise, she'll talk to you a little bit later, was leading the lease implementation. That was a big standard. I was leading the correction of OPEB accounting. And because what we had going on with ERP and lots of new people, we felt we just wanted to get a review of our work for that implementation, because normally we would spot each other and we were worried about our bandwidth. And so I reached out to the auditors and I said, hey, does this compromise your independence? And they said, I think so, even though you're asking us to review your completed work. So they were going to do no work, but I was just asking them to take a look. They could not do that. So we actually had to contract with a third-party firm to actually look at that work. And so when we hire staff, when I hire staff, I have to be really careful to make sure that staff who are making these material estimates really know what they're doing. And learning accounting is like learning a new language. And you start to view a number as a particular measurement, because that's what it really is. And we'll talk more about that later. City Clerk, if you could move to the next slide. We do have an annual audit requirement that is mandated by state statute. It's the purpose of this slide. We can move on to the next. Now, what is the ACFR? I thought the auditor did a pretty good job explaining it. It is a government's best practice government annual financial report. It contains multiple sections that are standardized, and the content within those sections is also standardized, so we don't get to dream up what we want to include in our ACFR every year. It's quite rigid. We elect to fulfill our annual reporting requirement with the ACFR format, even though it is more than we would have to do, because the incremental difference in the work that is required and the gold standard is actually pretty small. And because we prepare an ACFR, we are also eligible to participate in the Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting program, my goodness, which allows us to get further review of the report we compile each year. And so technical experts will review our ACFR on top of the work of the auditors and give us feedback for improvement. Every year we get a handful of comments, 4 that I think are really, of course we implement them, but I'm like, one of which I'm like, yeah, that's totally right. And so it's a really useful tool, and it's great to have that certificate just to show that we are doing the best we can to try to make those financial reports really good for our users. You can move to the next slide. Some more about GAAP. By now you know that acronym means Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. I want to just take a note and say that there are 2 standard setting bodies in the U.S. that promulgate GAAP. The FASB, which creates GAAP for private sector and not-for-profit entities, and the GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, which promulgates GAAP for government, because the business we engage in as government is quite different than our private sector and not-for-profit counterparts. Accounting standards are principles-based rather than rules-based. You wouldn't have known that in the late 90s and the early 2000s with all the financial reporting fraud. That's a great example of cherry-picking a rule from a broader standard, and likely a highly qualified person using that rule to maybe manipulate a company's stock price. That's what we call financial reporting fraud, and it actually has has impacts that are fairly great economically. Most people think of fraud only as taking maybe money out of a cash drawer, but financial reporting fraud can have fairly devastating consequences to the economy, and that's what we want to avoid by having principles-based standards. Even if we did not want to record our transactions in accordance with GAAP, we would have to, because Wyoming state statute tells us we need to. So no cash basis here at the City of Laramie. We would also note that GAAP changes every year, so we have to stay abreast of these standards and implement new things every year. Sometimes those standards are tough, like leases, like pension accounting was. OPEB was relatively simple. Sometimes they're really easy standards. It just depends on the year. City Clerk? Why are GAAP important? Well, we don't just love them in accounting. We actually know that what they do is they assure that transactions are accounted for similarly between different entities, and that note disclosures are also standardized, because the goal is comparability for a user. If you pick up one government's ACFR, it should be the same. Those numbers should be generated using the same conventions as another government's ACFR. We'll go to the next slide. This slide covers what's in a financial statement. I would encourage users to read this slide. I won't go over it tonight, but it just runs you through what's on a balance sheet, what's on an income statement, and how those two statements that can never be separated relate to each other. Next slide. I will go over this slide, what's in a financial statement number. And so what you realize as a professional accountant is that the number represents something, and it is a measurement. And what that measurement is depends on the basis of accounting that you're using. And for our ACFR, there are two bases of accounting that we utilize. One is the modified accrual basis, which focuses on current financial resources. The second is the accrual basis of accounting, which focuses on economic resources, and the two are very different from one another. What you'll notice if you read the budget book from front to back is that we also disclose our budget basis, which is a version of modified accrual with certain adjustments. And so what we're telling you by that is the way we're valuing those numbers in the planning process. City Clerk? This slide shows you a comparison of the different bases of accounting with just a couple of types of transactions, but this list is by no means exclusive. I'll use pension expense as the example I highlight tonight, just because it tends to be material, just like capital assets. And so if you look at our governmental fund statements that are reported using the modified accrual basis of accounting, pension expenditure will simply equal the city's statutorily required contribution plus any amount that the city might contribute for an employee on top of that, which would be defined by the collective bargaining agreement or our city handbook. So it's just what we're expending out as the city's contribution. But in the accrual basis of accounting, pension expense is the proportionate share of Wyoming Retirement System's actuarially determined net pension liability. So it's a very different number, different by millions of dollars. Next slide. This slide just summarizes the ACFR report sections. What I'd like to do here, rather than going through each section, is tell you how to access the ACFR. So you can get it on the city's website, and to get at it, if you're not comfortable going through the entire report, what I recommend that you do is start out reviewing the independent auditor's opinion. Go from there to the management's discussion and analysis. You'll find condensed financial statements in that section. You'll also find analysis of changes from year to year written in text format. So it's a little bit more accessible than simply diving right into that statements if you're not comfortable. By reviewing what you learn in the MD&A, you can also use the notes to the financial statements to learn more about transactions that maybe make you feel uncomfortable, like what's a deferred outflow of resources. So you can just pop back to those notes and see what that is, because the information is all there. There's also a great section at the beginning of the statistical section that presents 10-year trends for fund balance and net position and some of our other statements. And so even for someone who doesn't want to dive into every single page of the ACFR, and I think most people don't, unless they're a creditor, that would be a good way that you could spend an hour actually using the report in a fairly user-friendly way. You can go ahead and go to the next one. Awesome. We spent a lot of time during budget work sessions going over financial position as it relates to planning. And so there's no need tonight to dive into the details of the numbers on the ACFR in great depth. What I would like to note is just, I thought the auditor did a really good job on his presentation of the findings. We were absolutely expecting a finding related to the OPEB liability. As the auditor said, there's no way you can not record a transaction like that and then put it on your books when an accounting standard existed and not receive a material weakness in financial reporting. And so we were expecting that, and we actually had conversations, and I said, don't worry, just give us the finding. We know that that's what you have to do. And so we went into the audit season knowing that that would happen. What you'll notice on this slide is that that OPEB liability was indeed material to the tune of $1.2 million in the general fund and $300,000 in our business type activities. Another great reason, actually I'm not going to say that because I am unsure whether the OPEB liability will continue with us on the state pool. I have not done adequate research to determine that because we're part of a proportional pool then, and it may be just like Wyoming retirement system, so I need to do more research there. But we have one more year of the same type of OPEB liability that relates to a retiree health insurance subsidy. And so what we examined in the past year is that retirees were actually paying the same rates as our active employees, and we all know that as folks age, typically the cost of health goes up. And so when you have a situation where your retirees are paying the same rates as your active employees, that's called an implicit rate subsidy, and it means you have to get an actuarial evaluation and record this OPEB liability, and so that's what we did. You can go to the next slide. What I would like to point out on this slide is that for governmental activities net position, and so remember this is accrual basis accounting, what we saw between fiscal years was a $43.9 million increase from the prior year. $40.6 million of this increase was related to a pension expense adjustment for Fire Pension A. And I point this out to give you an idea of the materiality of pension accounting, because we're not talking in the 1 to 2 millions, we're talking in the tens of millions of dollars. Next slide. What I'd like to do in wrap up is just talk to you a little bit more about the standards we implemented. So I think I've talked OPEB to death. We'll continue to do that, but I'd like to invite someone very special to the podium to lead you through just a brief conversation about what the lease implementation did to our financial statements. Louise Johnson is going to join you tonight. She's the city's lead accountant, and she and I have worked together for almost a decade, and she did exceptional work on this standard. I want to tell you what the auditor said, and he said, you know, gosh, this work you guys do, it's like the same quality as the work they do at like the District of Columbia in Portland. And I said, I know. And she's definitely part of what makes that happen. And so she'll join you briefly, and then I'll pop back up to close it out.
Thank you, Director Wade. Welcome.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I will brief you, the operative word is brief, on a new accounting standard we implemented this year, which was lease accounting, GASB Statement 87. Like most accounting standards we implement, they're designed to in some way improve financial statements. And this standard was no different. It represented a fundamental change in how we account for and report leases. And these are just regular leases when you lease a building or lease land from someone. So the change basically was that in the past, before this statement was implemented, we just recorded rent expense, and that's what you saw in your financial statement was rent expense. And what this statement was meant to correct was really, and recognize, was the idea that these contracts that we have that may be over a long period of time are an obligation, and it's really actually similar to debt or similar to some big receivable that someone owes you for rent. And so what this did was changed this from a pay-as-you-go to really put them on the financial statements in a debt-like fashion. And so what you'll see in your financial statements this year are mentions of lease liabilities and lease receivables and actually intangible assets that we then amortize over a period of years of the lease contract. And so it got a lot more complicated. It gave us all job security because it was a heavy lift, and every year we have to evaluate all of our lease obligations. Additionally, you'll see in the notes to the financial statements a lot of details and the terms of those lease agreements that are required reporting now. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Yeah, Councilor Pierce, please.
Just a quick one. So how many leases do we have?
I said, I predicted that question. We have to report both as a lessor and as a lessee. So there are two sides to this. We ended up with 5 leases as a lessee that qualified for reporting under this standard, and 9 as a lessor, as we are the landlord.
Thank you. Councilor Richardson, did you have a question as well? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I would just like to point out, because Louise is being very gracious, what she didn't say to you, Council Member Pierce, is that she read probably 70 agreements to come up with that 9 and 5. And it was very tedious, and I'm so grateful that she actually completed that work with the quality that she did last year. This is the wrap up of our annual audit update from the auditor and our ACFR work session. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm also happy to sit down with you if you would like to just meet and talk about the ACFR in more detail.
Thank you, Director. Council members, any questions at the end here? Okay. Well, thank you for making this easily digestible, even at a late hour and after a long meeting. And thanks for handling it simultaneously with all the budget things and all of that, and making sure this happens to you and your team.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Council members, we're going to go to public comment at this point. Any members of the public still with us that would like to speak to this work session, you would have 3 minutes. Just raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none, we will close that public comment period. And council members, we're going to go to council updates and comments. But before we do that, I failed to welcome you, Jennifer. Really excited to see more of you. And hopefully not this late, ever again.
But no promise.
Yeah, no promises, but we will do better. All right, council members, updates and comments that are important that the rest of the council knows. Anyone have any? Okay. Members, we are on to the agenda review. We have a whole lot of proclamations. I will spread those out a little bit. We can do it in pre-council. And then we're just going to head straight into the consent agenda if any council members have anything they'd like to discuss there. Don't be surprised. I see that Assistant City Manager Fieser is not here, but you will see a lot of meetings in the minutes from the Park, Trees, and Rec Board. It won't just be the last meeting, so we're a little bit behind on those, so we will be caught up. Anything on the regular agenda, council members? Okay, I'm going to leave it there. And members, good work tonight. We are adjourned. 2 weeks? That's right, 2 weeks.